Starting with news from Israel. Now, Israel has gone to polls for the fourth time in 2 years. Prime Minister Netanyahu faces a tough re-election battle while the incumbent Prime Minister remains ahead in the polls. The Likud party is uncertain of clinching a governing majority. Now, Israelis have started to vote, with the nation still divided over whether Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will remain in power. 6.5 million registered voters will be deciding the fate of the nation. The main contenders for the March 23rd elections are Israel's longest-running Prime Minister, that is, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, Blue and White centrist alliance leader Benny Gantz, Likud defector Gideon Saar, who broke with Netanyahu to form his own New Hope party, and Yesh Atid leader Yair Lapid. Now, Netanyahu has turned Israel's world-leading rollout of vaccines into a showcase for his campaign, while the Likud leader is banking on it to be enough to help him sail through. Just a day before the elections, he was seen rallying supporters as he visited Jerusalem's Mahane Yehuda market.
I'm happy to be here with you. I ask you, do you want another election? Do you want a Likud government?
But as the crucial polls inched closer, thousands have taken to the streets to protest against Netanyahu's policies and leadership. An anti-corruption trial and former allies joining rival parties also means that Bibi's long run could be in danger. While the series of elections have been going on since April 2019, the winning parties failed to form a stable government. Experts say that Netanyahu's Likud party is likely to emerge as the biggest player, but polls predict that Israel's election is heading towards a deadlock. Although Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party is leading in the polls, it will need coalition partners to secure a 61-seat majority in the 120-seat Knesset. That means Israel is looking at three possible outcomes: another coalition under Netanyahu, an ideologically divided government united only by its opposition to him, or a looming fifth election for the West Asian nation. However, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank shrugged off the vote. Most of them predict that it would produce yet another right-wing government.
Unfortunately, as Palestinian people, we will not count on the Israeli elections, since it revolves in a vicious circle. And for the past 30 years, there has not been any tangible progress on the ground.
And now, foreign policy and international security analyst Dr. Israel Berman is joining us live from Jerusalem for more on this. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, while Netanyahu remains ahead in the polls, there is, of course, uncertainty of clinching a majority. What can you tell us about that? And, of course, we know that the previous coalitions did not work out.
Well, Netanyahu, he has his campaign, he has worked around a very active, extremely very well organized, dynamic campaign. Netanyahu is the master when it comes to political campaigning, which, of course, the fact that he's been Prime Minister now for 12 years tells you everything you need to know. The fact that he simply, when it comes to political spin, no one is able to compete with Netanyahu. And in spite of the awful year Israel has experienced, with 6,000 deaths in the pandemic, unemployment, Netanyahu is still the front runner, leading in the polls, as you mentioned, and he has a reasonable chance of forming a coalition.
All right. But from what we've seen so far, he seems to be banking on Israel's world-leading rollout of vaccines. But on ground, there have been protests, and his leadership and policies have been in question. How do you assess this?
Well, you have to give credit to Netanyahu in terms of the vaccine rollout, and Israel has emerged as the leading, as the country, as the leader in terms of the speed of the vaccination rollout, and Netanyahu is to a large degree banking on Israelis to forget about the fact that actually he's botched up during the year many failures in terms of dealing with the coronavirus. For example, the fact that because Netanyahu is so reliant, for example, on his ultra-orthodox partners, coalition partners who are ultra-orthodox. He has not for example, enforced coronavirus restrictions in ultra-Orthodox districts. So a lot of Israelis are bitter about the fact that while, for example, schools have closed in secular areas, in the ultra-Orthodox areas, they remained open. And this is a big part of the problem. And Netanyahu, on the other hand, because of the vaccine rollout, Netanyahu is hoping that is what Israelis will think about, not the fact that he's performed poorly in dealing with the pandemic.
All right, now there's also the case of the anti-corruption trial and former allies joining rival parties. What can we expect on that front? Now, polls predict that Israel's election is heading towards a deadlock.
There are concerns that if Netanyahu manages to form a coalition, he will try and push through legislation that will give him immunity against these corruption charges. Now, at the moment, the polls suggest that there could well be a deadlock, and we could even end up with a fifth election. But a lot of questions surround the Yamina party of Naftali Bennett, who is widely seen as a possible kingmaker. He is, of course, on the right-wing parties, which he has said straight out he's not going to support the centrist candidate Yair Lapid of the Yesh Atid party for prime minister, and it may well be that Netanyahu will, if Netanyahu is reliant on Naftali Bennett's party to form a government, Bennett will likely go with him. It's at the moment there is deadlock, but it is very possible that Netanyahu will have a late surge. That will be in the past, for example, the polls have underestimated support for the Likud party of Netanyahu. I wouldn't be surprised if this happens again this time round.
All right, Dr. Ezra Berman, thank you so much for joining us with all those inputs. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.